So anesthesia was obtained with some method of application, this drug. Penicillin, if patient is allergic, consider this drug. The groin was sterilized with this drug. We then said, treat these as probes and reconsider the entire corpus and find me those things that weren't mentioned in my original drug list. And we actually found things like bactericidal soap. Is that a drug? Interesting question. Should it be? If you're doing adverse drug events, you certainly should consider when you're putting an antibiotic on someone. For other things, maybe not. Iodine. Midazolam, which is induces anesthesia. Generally not an over-the-counter drug, so it wasn't in their over-the-counter drug list, but it needed to be in because it was used in surgery. So we found that by going around this loop a few times, you can take with a few starting samples, you can rapidly grow a pretty good list of all the things people are talking about of a particular type of entity. And that's exciting work, and we're working on a journal article on this right now, but it's been interesting to see what pops up when you run this.
Is a cardiologist interested in these things? What is the context here?
So there was no cardiologist in the world who cared about COX-2 inhibitors until 5 years ago.
I see.
Celebrex, Vioxx, whatever. So that's one thing that we found, is that it's amazing what you find out you should have been interested in.
That's true. The point is that typically a regular practicing cardiologist does not have interest in it. It shows up as an important thing.
Right.
Unless you're doing it for a drug company or something.
Right. This is actually for secondary, or for adverse drug event secondary use surveillance. So how many people who are given this drug later come down with this problem? So a good example is pseudoephedrine, right?
Yep.
There are like 18,000 side effects to pseudoephedrine, but how common are they really? And how do they compare with, phenylephrine? Right. So comparing those two and seeing the frequency, and again, this is based on Cox models and all that, but you can go through and find, yes, this patient was given this over-the-counter drug, this patient was given this, and then 3 days later, what's the chance you show up in the emergency room? Pattern building, this was starting with snippets like Apple and Steve Jobs. See if you can find the patterns between them. So if you look at them over the whole web, you get that CEO is the most common aligning term, computer employee, from, founder, some other things. So this was an interesting tool to try to use the web as a source of common sense knowledge for how two entities were related to one another. And again, not with NLP, this was just a demo using statistical frequency. Relationships between...
yeah. Google has a similar kind of thing. Is it similar technique or very different?
Yes, Google has now come out with a similar technique. And the gentleman is a real nice guy, he used to work for us. So IBM here, Microsoft here, how are the two connected? IBM through SAP to Computer Associates to Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. This is the list of the most common, the standard 7 degrees of separation. This is a reason that it's great to work at Almaden. So we did this, if you do this, you get a plate of spaghetti, right? Everything's connected to everything. How do you choose the right nodes to put up on this chart? So we were looking at this, and it was a mess in the cafeteria. And one of the electrical engineers said, well, just ground this, put 1 volt here, call the thickness of the lines, the thickness of the wires, and pick the 25 nodes with the most current flowing through them. We're like, okay, and voila, it works perfectly. So it's a great way to see how groups are related to one another.
This is a piece of work that we used, and with a minor slight enhancements.
Yes, if hypothetically you were looking for money launderers and trying to find relationships between them, this is one approach that works pretty, that it results in interesting results for that, which was some of the work that we did with the myth back. Does anyone remember doing the web of life as a kid, like kindergarten, what eats what? So this was something that we did just as an example to try to find named relationships on the web. And we found some interesting stuff, like for example, fish eat plants, frogs eat grasshoppers, crocodiles eat fish, but plants eat trees. Saw that, I said, plants eat trees. So I clicked on it and drilled down mistletoe, right? Parasitic plants that grow on trees. Interesting. Where you run into trouble, though, is where you see that sharks eat lions.
But the point there is that where did you get the word eats? Because most likely they would not use the word eats there.
That's right. We used a whole bunch of templates that were A eats B, right? Praise on, you know, we just went through and did that Ryloff thing to get a bunch of sample templates and then plugged them in. Sharks eat lions.
Sea lions.
Sea lions, exactly. And in fact, it's really hard to figure out. Sharks eat Pacific sea lions. I can drop Pacific, say sharks eat sea lions without changing the meaning too much. But if I say sharks eat lions, suddenly we have a problem. So understanding the strength of those noun associations and when the concept changes when you drop an adjective is a really hard problem, and one that we're continuing to do research on. But you can get really interesting relationships, and as you may guess, we weren't necessarily just doing A eats B. You can do this company looking to merge with, or any number of relationships. So there's this book that keeps getting recommended to me called What Not to Wear. It's hints on business dress. I have no idea why. I don't know if you saw everyone up front today, but somehow I may have missed the boat on that. So that book was very popular, and we were doing some monitoring at the time and looking at how frequently it was mentioned on blogs, and then comparing it to the sales rank on Amazon. And you can see this interesting feature that something peaked on blogs about 3 days before it peaked on Amazon. And we found this was consistent for a large number of classes of books. It wasn't almost 3 days, it was like 2 to about 5, but you could begin to see there's this rattling that would happen, and then suddenly there'd be a peak, which is when it sort of took off. Now, why would anyone care about this? If you're a company who has multiple distribution sites, and you can stage up books in various places, and you can do this by 2-day shipping rather than overnight shipping, you can save an awful lot of money by staging things where they need to. And if you can look to social media as a way of predicting when this is going to happen, the incremental cost of getting it wrong and distributing something by truck is quite low. The incremental cost of getting it wrong and not having it there and having to ship it by air is quite high. So you actually don't need to be right all that often for it to be a good thing to do to predict when you need to stage stuff at. So that was an interesting piece of work we did on looking, can you predict real-world results based on what people were talking about online? And it's basically on the fact that early adopters are early adopters, right? If someone was using blogs at that time, they were probably an early adopter of other things as well. And we're getting near the end here. So I will say this is a piece of work we did. Does everyone remember the Johns Hopkins researchers who said, what color is the universe? And they averaged the color of every star. And originally they reported that it was minty green, which I loved. And then they said, well, we got it wrong, and it's actually kind of a muddy tan color, and that was very disappointing. So I said, what color is the web? I want to average the color of every web page. What color would I get? Well, it's gray, of course, because there's a lot of white and black on the web. But there is a color to it, and if you saturate out the color, you get a blue. It's a very nice blue. It's a blue that made our PR department more happy than you can imagine, and got us in Time magazine. But anyway, so here's a regular plot, and here's a log plot, just so you can see. You get some peaks around reds and oranges, and peaks around blues, but the average is definitely towards here. The most common color right here is yellow. Why? Because variants on yellow are the faux paper colors, all of those tans and browns and whatnot that people use to make it look like paper. Exactly. However, it varies tremendously by geography. So the .com domain in the US is mostly white pages, some black, a little bit of gray, and colored pages tend towards blue. In South Korea, almost all the pages are white. Very, 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 very few black pages. Does anyone know why?
Cultural thing, I think so.
Yeah, black, very bad color. Having black is strongly associated with death. Having black on your corporate website? No. Grays, and then the colors tend towards greens because there are a lot of reds and oranges. It turns out Southeast Asia, lots of reds and oranges. Europe, purples. US, lighter blues.